Fishing cats are rare and elusive creatures native to the wetlands of Southeast Asia. Unlike typical house cats, these wild animals have specially adapted to life near water. Their webbed paws allow them to swim with ease, and they are often found hunting along riverbanks and marshes where they catch fish and amphibians. However, despite their remarkable abilities, fishing cats are increasingly threatened by habitat loss and human encroachment. In a small riverside village nestled in the heart of this region, Mark, a local fisherman, spent his days casting nets and lines into the flowing waters, earning a modest living from the river's bounty. The village, surrounded by dense jungle, was a place where wildlife sightings were common but rarely close. The villagers had a deep respect for the natural world, often sharing stories of encounters with animals, but few had ever seen a fishing cat in the wild. The river that wound through the village was known for its strong currents and unpredictable nature. Though it provided the villagers with sustenance, it could be treacherous, especially during the rainy season. The very same river that nourished their livelihood could be a perilous force for both humans and animals alike. One warm afternoon, as Mark set out in his small boat, he noticed something unusual by the riverbank, a small, disheveled figure lying motionless in the shallow water. At first, he thought it was just debris. But as he steered his boat closer, his heart skipped a beat. What he saw was a fishing cat, a species he had only ever heard about but never seen in person. It was weak, unable to move, and appeared to be in grave distress. Mark's mind raced as he anchored his boat near the shore, staring at the injured animal. The fishing cat's fur, usually sleek and beautifully patterned, was matted and soaked from the river water. Its breathing was shallow and uneven, and it was clearly struggling to stay conscious. Its paws, which should have been strong and nimble for swimming, were trembling, and it looked as though it had been stranded for hours, possibly even days. Mark's first instinct was to turn away and call for help, but he quickly realized that no one was nearby. The village was small, and the nearest wildlife rescue center was miles away. The fishing cat, most likely an adult, was on its own. Mark had heard stories of fishing cats, but he knew little about how to handle them. His knowledge of wild animals was limited to the fish he caught and the occasional wild boar that roamed the area. As he assessed the situation, Mark could see that the fishing cat was not only exhausted but also injured. Its front legs seemed to be caught in some debris, and there were visible gashes along its side. The cat's golden eyes met his, filled with fear and confusion. It was a wild animal, and its instinct to flee was strong, but in its weakened state, it had no strength left to run. Mark had a choice to make. Should he leave the cat to die, or should he try to help? He knew the risks, approaching a wild animal, especially one as fiercely territorial as a fishing cat, was dangerous. But the animal's condition was dire, and Mark couldn't bear to watch it suffer. He took a deep breath and decided to act. Mark quietly stepped out of his boat and waded through the shallow water towards the fishing cat. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved, each step calculated and cautious. The cat's golden eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Mark thought it might lash out. But the cat was too weak, and instead, it let out a soft, pitiful mew, as if pleading for help. Mark knelt down beside the animal, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't want to startle it further. The cat flinched as he reached out, but it didn't try to move away. Mark gently examined the cat's leg, which appeared to be caught in some tangled branches. The injury was serious, but Mark couldn't tell how deep the cuts were without causing more distress. The cat's body was thin, its ribs visible beneath its fur. It had likely been stranded without food for days. Mark's mind raced as he considered the options. He could try to free the cat's leg and get it to safety, or he could leave it, hoping it would heal on its own. But the cat's condition made it clear that it needed immediate care. His hands trembled slightly as he carefully worked to untangle the cat's leg, trying not to cause any more harm. The fishing cat let out a low growl, but it wasn't aggressive, just a warning. Mark spoke softly to the animal, trying to reassure it. He had no idea whether the cat understood his words, but he hoped that his calm demeanor would help ease its fear. After a tense moment, the cat's leg was free. Mark quickly checked its other limbs and found no other serious injuries, but the cat was still breathing heavily and looked on the verge of collapse. Mark knew that the hardest part was still ahead, getting the cat back to safety. The next task was getting the fishing cat into his boat. Mark knew that if he couldn't get the animal out of the water and into shelter, it wouldn't survive. But the cat was clearly frightened, and the closer Mark got, the more it tensed. Its sharp claws glinted in the sunlight, and Mark knew that any sudden movement could lead to a dangerous attack. However, he also understood that the cat was too weak to fight back. Mark took a deep breath and, with great care, gently lifted the cat by its body, wrapping one arm around it. The cat let out a startled hiss but didn't attempt to struggle. Mark, his heart racing, carefully placed the cat into the boat, making sure to support its injured leg. The moment the cat was in the boat, Mark pushed off from the shore. He paddled slowly, trying not to disturb the fragile creature. As they drifted away from the shore, Mark felt the weight of the situation. He wasn't just rescuing a wild animal, he was dealing with a life-and-death scenario. Each movement, each breath from the fishing cat, was a reminder of how fragile the situation was. The river, which had once seemed so peaceful, now felt treacherous. The currents picked up, and Mark had to fight to keep the boat steady. The cat lay motionless at his feet, its eyes half-lidded as if it were already on the edge of exhaustion. Mark paddled with all his strength, determined to reach the village where he could get the cat help. When he reached the shore, Mark quickly carried the fishing cat to his small hut, where he had a first aid kit. The cat's body felt impossibly light in his arms, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He needed to stabilize it before it could make it to a proper veterinarian. Once inside the hut, Mark carefully laid the fishing cat on a blanket. He started assessing the injuries, but as he touched the cat's leg, it flinched, letting out a sharp growl. Mark knew that any attempt to treat the leg without professional help could make things worse. The fear in the cat's eyes was palpable. It was in pain, but it was also terrified of being touched. Mark had to think quickly. He couldn't risk further injury, and he certainly couldn't afford to wait for professional help. He had no choice but to try and stabilize the cat himself. He carefully applied pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding, but the cat's struggling made it difficult to get a clear view of the injury. The next challenge came when the fishing cat, despite its exhaustion, tried to escape. It scrambled weakly across the floor, its claws scraping against the wood. Mark knew he had to act fast to prevent it from injuring itself further. He gently restrained the cat, using a towel to wrap its body and keep it still. The cat growled in protest, but Mark spoke softly, reassuring it that he wasn't trying to hurt it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark managed to stabilize the cat. He administered some emergency fluids and made a makeshift splint for its leg. The cat was weak but no longer in immediate danger, though Mark knew the real challenge was still ahead. He would need to get the cat to a veterinarian as soon as possible. The next morning, Mark made the decision to take the fishing cat to the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center. He carefully wrapped the cat in a blanket and placed it in the back of his truck. The journey was long, but Mark's determination never wavered. He kept checking on the cat, making sure it was still breathing, still alive. When they arrived at the rehabilitation center, the staff immediately took over. They praised Mark for his efforts, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. The cat's injuries were severe, but with proper care, it had a fighting chance. Over the next few weeks, the fishing cat, which the staff named River, slowly regained its strength. The wound on its leg healed, and its once matted fur began to shine again. Mark visited often, watching as River grew stronger with each passing day. One day, after several weeks of recovery, the staff called Mark. River was ready to return to the wild. It was an emotional moment for Mark. He had saved a life, but now he had to let it go. He accompanied the staff to the riverbank, where they released River back into the wild. As River bounded into the water, disappearing into the dense jungle, Mark felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had saved a life, and in doing so, had made a difference in the delicate balance of nature.